For my assignment, I've interviewed 2 teachers from International Community School. Both of these teachers have a great deal of experience teaching in international schools. It's important at the outset of these interviews to note that ICS is an American school. It's a Christian school here in Bangkok. We have over 20 different nationalities of students, and from those students, about 80% are from non-Christian backgrounds. Most of them are Thai, Chinese, Buddhist families. Their parents choose to send them to ICS to get an American education with the hope that they will go to a college or university in America. All lessons, except for specialty language lessons like French or Spanish, are taught in English. There's a level of English language proficiency that students must attain before they can start at ICS. I have with me today Mike Holden, who's a teacher at International Community School in Bangkok. His role here is the capstone coordinator. I read a report recently noting that educational experts are urging teachers to develop pedagogical practices that promote real-world experiences, that engage students in service, and help develop critical thinking. In the light of that research, could you please tell us about the Capstone project here at ICS?
Yeah, sure. So the Capstone Service Project is a project that's done over 2 years, over the junior and senior year, the last 2 years of school here at ICS. Students are required to identify a real issue, a real need in a community, and then they need to actually implement an intervention in that community and then measure the success of that project.
Could you give us some examples of how students have met outcomes from different KLAs in their service projects?
Sure. So I think the Capstone project is one of a great way that service learning kind of happens here at ICS. And so part of that is that we use a 5-stage service learning process by Kathy Berger-Kay. And at the kind of the center of that model is curriculum. And so we really want to see how does each of the elements of investigation or preparation or action, how does that really engage with curriculum? And so in the capstone process, I particularly see this as students are developing their strategies. And so as students, maybe they've identified a need and now they've got a question that they're trying to solve, they then are looking at either promising practices or maybe it's a process or a theory that they've learned or that they can apply or leverage in kind of the strategy to solve that problem. So they might take a business concept for marketing or something like that and then use that process as they try to help kids to change the way the kids are thinking or behaving in another way. So like getting them to brush their teeth or something about dental hygiene, but using that kind of marketing kind of concept from business class kind of in that way. I think another example, maybe outside of the capstone, is with the 4th grade. So for instance, they go and do one of their field trips at a really cool organization called Second Chance. And so Second Chance has both kind of a second store where they're kind of selling seconds, but they also do a lot of upcycling. And so the students then are learning in social studies and math class some different concepts related to fair trade and other things like that. And then they come to Second Chance and are actually able to see that and engage in that process a little bit and see kind of really how that really specifically works in a real life situation. And what was really cool is that we actually designed that field trip not about the field trip and where they're going necessarily, but we started with those learning objectives in class and then try to figure out ways to get students out and to experience that in a real way. And then what was awesome is that ended up being kind of a service opportunity for them as well. So they're learning about things in class, they're learning about it, how it's really happening, and in the context of an organization that's helping people, and in particular in one of the biggest slums in Bangkok and really in the world, which is a pretty awesome experience for these kids to take what there's in the textbook and then to really see that in their on their field trip.
And Second Chance Bangkok is run by an Australian couple.
Definitely.
So that makes it even more awesome.
Exactly.
A deliberate attempt made within the Capstone project to develop tolerance and positive attitudes towards multicultural and different faith groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's kind of one of our primary goals, actually. I think part of that is, again, like, not that students are just learning and reading and researching about, this process or a people group or community or issues, but they're actually going and doing it. And so that process of engaging with people, I think is huge. And so as we look at trying to develop students that have a broader, deeper perspective, again, it's one thing if I read about it and that may, connect with me in a certain way, but it's a completely different thing when I'm out there and I'm building relationships with other people. And I think with our students, it's pretty interesting because, like, for instance, a lot of our students are really kind of on the top of the pyramid. I mean, they are oftentimes kind of the high so, and then to connect with people in the slums or connect with rural farmers. And so then that really takes them out of their comfort zones. It really challenges them to really look at the assumptions that they make and things that they believe are true, but then through the needs assessment process, really forcing them to look at that and really understand, what do I really think and believe here? And then, wow, like, maybe I was making assumptions that weren't correct, and then how do I address those? How do I wrestle with those things and build that broader, deeper multicultural perspective?
And how about interfaith kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so I think that happens in a lot of different ways too. Like, some of our students are Buddhists, and they may actually connect with, say, a group like Second Chance that's coming from a faith background. And is kingdom oriented in the work that they're doing. And so as they are interacting with the organization who's making a kingdom impact, there's a whole nother level to wrestle with as they do that. I think it also happens with some of our Christian kids as they then are engaging with the Buddhist Thai community and really making an impact on maybe a real, like, social development level, but then recognizing that there's so many more levels and layers to the issues and challenges. And I think another maybe focus is, like, with our ESLers, and that part of the Capstone project is to address, or for students to demonstrate the ESLers. And so these are a list of traits that individual schools develop, but it's a process that, and I guess these are ways that we hope, or our desire is that our students would be developing these traits and then would become sort of these traits as they've graduated from us. So part of the Capstone project then is for our students to, as seniors, to be able to demonstrate and to reflect on how they have achieved these traits. And I think, as we look at, one of our traits is follower of Christ, and so as they go through the process of the Capstone, they're really challenged then to understand what the biblical perspective is, and what does the Bible actually say about the poor, or what does the Bible actually say about people in need, and how does the Bible and how does Christ challenge us to engage with those communities, and then for them, whether they're believers or non-believers, like, how do they then wrestle with and reconcile their Buddhist perspective versus the biblical perspective in that process. And so I think that's a really good way for them to really, again, get out of the classroom and experience some of those challenges kind of firsthand.
A deliberate attempts made to ensure that students from multicultural backgrounds are actively engaged in learning.
So I think active engagement in learning is really important, again, in this process. And so, again, it's getting those kids out of the classroom, getting them to do the needs assessment, and then I think, like, really that's central to this whole process. So they can't just come in and say, oh, I want to do a project about X or Y. Like, if it's not a need in the community, they can't do it, right? So they have to have that real, like, customer focus and understanding the community that they're working in. And then I think with that too, like, they are learning a lot about their community, but then through the process they learn more. And so it has to be an iterative process where they're then, oh wow, I didn't realize this was true, or there's a whole other layer to this, and maybe I need to address it at a deeper level. And so they're changing and adjusting and adapting what they're doing. And I think kind of that process that is really active in as they get deeper and understand different cultures that they're working in, and yeah, through that process.
So your teaching role isn't face-to-face, normal classroom of kids kind of teaching role here. Can you explain how that works?
Yes, so definitely a little bit different than your traditional teacher. So I'd say there's a couple different ways in which I kind of function, but I'm always trying to like learn and adjust and find new ways to do this as well. So kind of big picture with service learning coordinator, a lot of it has to do with just trying to get information out and so to communicate. And so whether that is bringing in speakers to talk about a particular issue or community, whether that is just different campaigns that we run. So here at the school we have something called the Voice for the Voiceless, and so each month we kind of focus on a different people group or a different community and learning about them and the issues that they face. And then in particular, I think with the capstone project, a lot of it comes down to like the individual meetings that I have with students. And so I think that really has been effective as I am really able to understand each student individually and try to ask them a lot of questions, understand where they're at in the process, understand what things that they understood, what things are they still kind of fuzzy on, and then we kind of are able to address those things individually. I also hold a lot of workshops for the big process, and then I use a lot of online instruction as well, and so using Google Classroom, I post videos on there, there's lots of resources, things for students to go through, assignments, and then I think most of my day is spent kind of on the computer emailing and writing comments to students on like the work that they've done. And so I think a lot of that process, I have the privilege of being able to work very individually with students, whereas I think in a big classroom that is more difficult or challenging, right? But I think that's maybe a benefit that I have. But obviously it also takes a lot of time.
Yeah, for sure. So how does that, your contribution in that role, I guess, support cross-curricular learning, so looking at different KLAs and what the kids are doing with you, and how does that work across?
Yeah, definitely. So I think with like the capstone project in particular, one of the pieces that they have to communicate and to the assessors in the end, and then also figure out in the process, is that research-based solution. And so with that, that's a really big piece where they are leveraging things that they're learning in class into their project and their strategy. So a lot of that then becomes like this coaching discussion that we have and trying to help and push kids towards understanding what their issue or their challenge is, and then where they can draw from their own experience at that point as they develop that strategy. And then I think otherwise, that kind of in the bigger elements of my job, I think a lot of it has to do with just like meeting with teachers again individually and trying to support them. So again, like that 4th grade class, it was meetings with those teachers and saying like, okay, we've got these learning objectives, we want to do something outside of the classroom. They were already interested in doing something related to service as well, so then how can we merge all of those and create those cross-curricular connections?
So how do you work within your teaching role, unique as it is, to recognise the varied learning needs of students from different multicultural backgrounds?
Yeah, so I think this is a challenge, definitely working in international school in particular, and coming from a Western background and culture and values and thought process, and then our students coming from all over the place, right? And so, and in particular, a lot of them being Asian. So then I think in those individual meetings, as part of that is really trying to understand like deeper into that students like perspective and the values that are driving them and their experience. And so trying to ask a lot of questions and me not even making assumptions, right? I'm trying to get the kids not to make assumptions, and I need to do that as well, about just how they're thinking and how they're understanding kind of what the concept that we're looking at. And then from that, trying to kind of address that in those ways.
Yeah.
I think Kagan structures is a really great way to do that. And so I try to use a lot of those in my teaching and the workshops. I think I'm a pretty active learner myself, so I try to really have kids kind of workshop through different concepts, so it's not just me sage on stage kind of presenting. And I think that really helps to, again, create more of a discussion and more collaborative kind of process in that. So.
I'm here with Mr. Nate. He is a high school ESL teacher at International Community School in Bangkok. He's been teaching at ICS now for 12 years, and in this time has taught from elementary right through to high school. So he has a broad range of experience across age groups and year levels and KLAs as well. So a deliberate attempt made to develop tolerance and positive attitudes towards multicultural groups in your classroom?
For us, we pick novels or literature-based programs, so we have a wide variety of novels that we let the students choose from as a class, and we will read it together. And then if you spread out all the grade levels, there are different types of backgrounds that the characters come from. There's a story about a girl in China, a girl in India, a boy in Korea, and a samurai in Japan. Those are some of the stories, but really, it doesn't matter what we read. We always talk about, we're always comparing this is kind of American culture, this is what this character did, how would a Thai or a Korean respond in this situation, and then to take it a step further within kind of a worldview section, we talk about biblical integration, so in terms of trying to discuss, okay, well, was this decision a moral decision? Was it ethical? Was it, what does the Bible say about that? And how do we kind of weave that perspective into the development of the story?
Sue Walters in 2007 outlined what is required if we are to provide a good education suited to the needs of bilingual learners. One of these things is that classrooms where the student's identity, home language, and literacy practices are respected and affirmed, and where parents are involved and respected. So with that in mind, our deliberate attempts made to ensure that students from multicultural backgrounds are actively engaged in learning here?
Yeah, I mean, in our ESL program, they are obviously the students come from backgrounds that are not American, and so they are multicultural, and so by nature we have small class sizes intentionally so that students feel safe and comfortable to be able to talk, especially in the cultures where it is more of a top-down model in terms of authority and teacher-centered education, so they're not used to this interaction that they get and that they need to develop conversation, listening and speaking skills, as well as to talk about things that they've read or to get feedback on things that they've written. And so to kind of help students feel that they are not so afraid and feel more comfortable, we try to keep the class sizes small. We have a microphone we pass around for students that don't speak very loudly because, because again, that's not something that a lot of Asian students aren't used to speaking so loudly or giving their opinions even is kind of a big deal for them. They're used to kind of, what does the teacher want me to say? I'll answer. And so we just have conversations for the sake of conversation. Sometimes they don't know what to do with themselves. So all of these dynamics that we use parent share and kind of small group size. Our classes are just kind of small group, but it helps to kind of give them a chance to think about it and before they answer. We use these red and green cards. Do they understand? If they understand, then those kinds of those are the best practices that you can say around the world work, but especially in Asian culture, it seems to really work because it allows the students time to process linguistically, but also culturally. There's more time pause between in the West we tend to kind of go back and forth really quickly, whereas in the East they kind of give time. They always make sure everybody has a chance to speak. So we try to set up the class in that kind of environment to allow really to try to be less competitive and more inclusive.
Okay.
That helps.
So that's an ESL strategy, but also a cultural thing, definitely.
Yeah, it works. Yeah, it works. the two seem to work really well hand in hand. And another thing that we do is we also, provide a close relationship. We try to establish a closer relationship with parents, and we use that to our advantage. Because of course the students want to please their parents, and especially in Asian culture, and also they will have respect for the teacher. So we try to take that. I try to take both of those two things and use it to the advantage, so that students, and also group culture, so we can get the students starting to say, hey, this teacher, will praise me if I do well, and then hey, doing well is a great, cool, fun thing. Let's all do well. Then it kind of makes that group culture of hey, that's going to move towards excellence. And so I do things like putting stamps on their paper. Now, you do that in first and second grade. You do that to a high schooler in the States or maybe Australia, and they might laugh at it. Here, they really like it. If I don't put that stamp on their paper, they get a little upset because they really, that means something.
Cool. Jim Cummins in 1999 said there are clear differences in developmental patterns between conversational language and academic language, otherwise known as BICS, which is basic interpersonal communication skills, and CAP, cognitive academic language proficiency. The conceptual distinction between these two levels highlights misconceptions about the nature of language proficiency, which contributes to academic failure among bilingual students. Differences in the rate of acquisition of the two levels need to be considered so that the academic language education of bilingual children with good conversational English doesn't suffer. So how do you ensure, in this context, that a student has both BICS and CAP?
Probably 70% of our effort is on the academic English development, since that's the students that come in our population. The students that come here are focused on going to university and probably going abroad for university, so try to help them with that academic stuff first. And so the second thought is, and we use monologues and scenes from movies and things like that as well. It kind of helps them. You have to memorize monologues from some of those scenes from movies or essays that people have written in more informal speech. But ultimately, it's not the primary focus.
Yeah. So you're focusing more on the academic language.
Yeah. In terms of the school as a whole, the other teachers teach ESL too, in a way, right? So they're getting it all the time.
How do classroom activities recognize the varied learning needs of students from multicultural backgrounds for all or nearly all of your students?
I think what I work, and I think I kind of maybe I touched on this before, is kind of the small group. And having parents share those kinds of activities.
So I guess recognizing the cultural needs, like you were saying, the students in Asia, there's a need to save face, so you never want to embarrass the students.
We don't use sarcasm. Well, sarcasm isn't even necessarily always understood in the same way, so it's perceived as much darker, harsher than it's meant to from my culture. And so I try not to use that at all. Trying to help the students save face. For example, speaking. If they're speaking too quietly, instead of just simply saying, you need to speak up, what's wrong with you? Because they already feel frustrated. We want them to have positive feelings about speaking English, and if they feel like shut down, that doesn't help that come out. So I'll just make excuses like, the air conditioner's really loud today, or something that avoids them losing face. Does help a lot.
I'm interested to talk here about the differences between literacy and numeracy learning in ESL students. I know from your lesson plans, because I've subbed for your lessons, that you focus a lot on comprehension through reading text and answering questions, and you've already mentioned that that's really what you're predominantly doing in the lesson times that you have. Do you only work with your students on literacy, or do you work with them on numeracy and other KLAs as well?
The focus is really on literacy development, more than numeracy, because at ICS we are all ESL teachers, so the mainstream classroom teachers are supposed to, because we have 80% of our population are ESL students, so the mainstream teachers are supposed to kind of bring in, especially in the math department, they talk about how do we use English when it comes to math, how do we use English when it comes to science, when it comes to social studies. And since it is a kind of highly academic, it's a high academic environment, and the goals are trying to achieve higher learning, so the students tend to try to fit into that as much as they can, and the teachers will need to kind of come alongside the students to make sure that they're able to express themselves in that way. But
so I just have a quote here. It says, in recent times, the emphasis of what constitutes mathematics in Australia has changed. Work samples presented in the Australian mathematics curriculum, that comes from ACARA, delineate tasks denominated by language-rich activities encompassing both English language and mathematical language. I like what you said about that each teacher here is responsible for the teaching of English as a second or subsequent language, because in this setting, certainly, I guess it would be easy to say, well, all of the students who need it go to ESL, so I don't need to worry about that. But in math class, they're teaching math in English, and in science class, they're teaching science in English. So it's really important for all of the teachers to take ownership of that ESL role.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there are schools, in the States and probably Australia, where you might have 20% of the population would be is ELL or second language learners, or English language learners. But because we have such a high percentage, you need to take that into consideration.
How are culturally inclusive practices incorporated in relation to curriculum, classroom teaching, assessment, and resource selection? I feel like you've already answered that. Resource selection.
Yeah, so the resource selection. And I do a project also that really does examine differences in cultures. We have this 13 values Americans live by as an essay. We look at that, we take it apart. I give each value to the students, and I say, okay, compare or contrast that value to your own culture. And then they have to provide evidence through pop culture, through their own personal experiences on both sides, whether it's American or whether it's, because sometimes you read something, is this really true? Well, let's find the evidence for it. And so it's kind of getting them used to research, but it's something that hits close to home. It's helping them understand and relate to our culture, the culture of the teachers, and the culture that they could be going to school in the future. Helps them to kind of say, okay, this is why this is important, or this is, especially because they're growing up in this kind of a weird, almost third culture, right? Because they've got at home, they're speaking Thai or Korean or Chinese or whatever, and then at ICS they're speaking English, and so they're trying to say, well, who am I, as they develop through this. And so it does.